Hello, my name is Claire, and I don't know about you, but any game that has me pressing X to think about taking a shower is a winner in my books. In all seriousness though, I have to admit that some of these video game film hybrid thingies known as interactive movies are somehow among my favorite video games of all time. I know, okay, I'm not proud of it. But hang on, why am I ashamed to admit this? Is it possible that the whole interactive movie label is the reason why I feel like I'm betraying my gamer creed? Or is the label itself actually kind of problematic? Press X to find out. I didn't even hit the button properly. Whether you love them, hate them, or literally just play Minecraft and couldn't care less, the concept of a movie game thing is a fairly recent yet pervasive one. While used as an umbrella term for video games that resemble films both in a visual and storytelling sense, there's actually no clear-cut set of rules for what makes a video game officially an interactive movie. Taking many forms across many different systems, these so-called quasi-games, quite frankly, kind of baffle us in their unashamed portrayal of complex stories through shake the controller to tell yourself gameplay. And while we're on the topic of narratives, it's important for the context of this video to refer to games as a storytelling medium. Let's face it, it's hard to come by a game today that doesn't incorporate some sort of narrative, even when it's ambiguous, abstract, or heck, totally imagined. In my case, it's normally the latter. Increasingly, stories are becoming not only a common element of games, but a crucial one. No matter if it's a sprawling epic with intricate lore or, yes, literal car soccer, narrative traits such as progression, setting, and signposting can be seen in almost any modern or classic title. Now, when it comes to interactive movies, the narrative suddenly takes center stage, often overtaking the gameplay as we suck on purpose just to see what happens when everybody dies. And don't get me wrong, while I love exploring all the unique ways each character can brutally be murdered in Until Dawn as much as the next person, the idea of a narrative seemingly surpassing the game itself really gets me thinking. What exactly does the interactive movie label really mean? And are the games that fit into this niche really games at all? Now, before I launch into how repeatedly yelling Jason over and over again makes for truly compelling gameplay, let's first take a look into how the interactive movie came into existence. Now, the term became popular in the mid-90s to early 2000s, used to describe titles that merge the interactive qualities of video games with quote-unquote realistic visuals of live-action films. Now, the idea seemed pretty novel at the time, and there was actually a lot of hype around its potential. I mean, imagine your favorite thriller or action movie suddenly becoming playable, its outcomes determined only by you. Digital media scholar Tanine Allison calls this the conceptualization and convergence of spectatorship and interactivity. Or, if you're dumb like me, the process of taking a passive, movie-watching audience and transforming them from spectators into agents who hold the controller. Now, as the saying goes, the expectations often surpass the reality, but in the case of the interactive movie game, well, even the expectations weren't enough. Because unfortunately, while awesome in theory, the earliest interactive movies didn't quite make for a groundbreaking new innovation in digital technology. They were either too restrictive for a worthwhile gaming experience or too stilted for a realistic visual film experience. And also, they were just really awkward. Inevitably, interactive movies got a bad rep for their dismal controls and terrible quality pictures, and were sort of just laughed out of existence. So how do the interactive movies of today succeed where their predecessors failed? Well, I'd say the key factor at play is technology. Probably the greatest obstacle in making a game like Phantasmagoria in the 90s was the disparity between lifelike graphics and consistent controls, a once glaring gap that can now be filled thanks to motion capture, the advancement of animation, and controls that are way better integrated into modern consoles. But the crazy thing about recent gen gaming is that the line between movies and video games is starting to look less and less glaring, as ray tracing and photorealistic graphics are kind of now the done thing. What is it that truly separates a good romp of a movie with a good romp of a video game? When you really think about it, it's scary just how closely video games resemble movies at the moment. It makes sense, seeing as they're both primarily visual mediums. Elements like cinematography, mise-en-scene, composition, camera techniques, lighting, aesthetics, all common conventions of film are prevalent in modern games. You think that lens flare piercing the virtual sky of Assassin's Creed is an optical illusion? It's a purposefully programmed emulation of how light reflects off an actual camera lens, almost as if the game is trying to convince you that it has as much cinematic merit as a David Attenborough documentary. Although I can't entirely argue with that. Photorealism and the pressures of making a graphically flawless final product is the norm of modern gaming, and why? all in the name of pushing the technical capabilities of games, improving how they can indeed emulate live action. At least, as closely as possible. Obviously, there are some exceptional exceptions to this rule, and some magnificent titles out there that define their own artistic and innovative visual conventions. But not so long ago, the attitude that first inspired the interactive movie was the very same one that thought video games needed to be legitimized by looking like a live-action film. Listen to a snippet from this review I found of Final Fantasy VII when it first came out in 1997. With its broad but tiny characters engaged in outsized struggles, its righteously straightforward narrative, and its glossy virtual eye candy, Final Fantasy VII not only matches your average mid-level genre pick, but also beats it in one very important respect. You're the star. So ignoring his painfully pompous tone, clearly the idea of a video game that played like a movie just blew the mind of this critic, who even went as far as to say that not only was Final Fantasy VII extravagant for a game, but was, get this, in its own way at least as good as a movie. Alright, yep, let's take a minute here. From a mainstream point of view then, were games only considered good if they resembled movies? Yes, I'm taking this assumption from a dude who refers to cutscenes as cool video sequences, but you gotta admit, this was a pretty disappointing dominant attitude of the time. Films have been around a lot longer than video games have, and have thus had more time to establish themselves as products of a higher culture than their newly emerged counterparts. I mean, it's a fact I don't like admitting, but it's just kind of how it is. But the idea of agency and centralization of the player was such a novel idea. It was the belief that taking the game aspect out of the game and popping it into a lifelike, spick and span visual spectacle really was, according to this guy at least, the future of interactive entertainment. Now, I don't mean to make any bold assumptions here, but I have a feeling that this attitude is kind of one of the reasons why the gaming community is so divided when it comes to interactive movies. A lot of my friends who consider themselves hardcore gamers often turn their noses up at interactive movies, and I can see where they're coming from because the common attitude around them is that they're sort of a shell of a game repackaged into a pretty cutscene show. I'll emphasize what I mean here. David Cage, the director of one of the most well-known interactive narrative studios, Quantic Dream, is quoted as saying that he doesn't even consider his titles to be video games at all. Whether this is because he doesn't believe Heavy Rain and Detroit Become Human fit well enough into typical gaming conventions, or just wants to dissociate from the game label entirely, we can't exactly be sure. But it does raise an interesting idea. If an interactive movie seems to be more movie than game, does that make it a lesser game? Does it make it a game at all? To approach this question, what we really need to address is what makes a video game a video game. Our buddy Oxford defines a video game as a piece of media played by electronically manipulating images produced by a computer program on a monitor or other display. Whew, okay, talk about a convoluted definition. Nevertheless, it does give us an answer about this interactive movie business. It's indisputable. Any computer program that we can electronically engage with is legally a video game, which means that titles like Heavy Rain and Life is Strange belong on the shelf with Dark Souls and Forza 5, right? But then we consider Netflix's recent revolution, Black Mirror Bandersnatch. You know, that small, hardly talked about, not that interesting episode released back in 2018. Now hear me out. While Bandersnatch isn't experienced within a computer program, and you can't move around a digitally rendered Will Poulter or make him purposefully fail QuickTime events for the lols, the principle of interactivity is the same. It employs user engagement to drive a narrative, so it's basically like a live-action Heavy Rain minus a couple of buttons. So the question I hate to ask, but sorta have to is, how do we know whether it's a video game or just an interactive experience? If you were to ask a bunch of people what they believed was the single defining trait of a video game, well, you're gonna get a lot of different answers. To this person, video games require an element of skill, of fighting off swarms of gorgeous dead things and beefing up your beloved Khajiit warrior on the go. To these people, video games are defined by clear-cut goals, and how virtual environments are designed with obstacles in mind to overcome in order to proceed. Solving puzzles, boss fights, HP and EXP systems are all common gaming conventions. Not always simultaneously present, but present in at least one way or another across all genres. Modern interactive movies don't include these traits. They emphasize cinematics in place of a leveling system. Action and fighting scenes are scripted and often based on QuickTime events as opposed to more real-time button-mashing inputs. Even navigable areas are highly restricted, with the invisible wall of doom preventing anyone from daring to venture beyond the specific intended scene. These games don't have high scores or health points. Due to their linear nature, they can't be speedrun. speed ran, and don't have game overs and respawns because the characters you brutally murder with your ineptitude stay permadead. Yeah, you better be pleased with yourself, you monster. Certainly, with this blatant upheaval of the tropes we love in our favourite games, it's no wonder we're reluctant to call these things games as well. But maybe we're going about this all wrong. Maybe games don't define themselves, but are instead defined by the player. Pioneering ludologist Espen Aarseth famously said that the most fundamental trait of a video game is the freedom of choice. He argues that every game must revolve around the player's ability to make decisions and have those decisions impact how the game unfolds. Whether that involves choosing where to move, which enemy to target, or whether I should ignore this Korok seed and move on with my life or torture myself because I vowed to collect all 900 of the bastards. According to Aarseth, if the choices presented to the player are so limited that they clearly seem to lead the action in one unavoidable direction, as interactive movies are thought to do, they become quasi-choices, and the game becomes a quasi-game. Now, no disrespect to Mr. Aarseth, but I gotta disagree with him on this one. Games are all about quasi-choices. They all lead us in an unavoidable direction because they're purposefully designed to escort us from A to B. It might not seem like it, but the freedom they offer is presented within extremely strict, perfectly coded virtual systems. Prepare your brain for this, but the very notion of player agency, a key defining factor in video games, is nothing more than an illusion. Games are games because of their rules. Otherwise, how do we make sense of their imagined systems and play them the way they're built to be played? They're certainly not made equal, for sure. Some games have more limitations than others, but that doesn't make them fake games. In fact, the broadest open world RPGs are actually taking a leaf out of Quantic Dream and Don't Nod's book, increasingly utilizing butterfly effect gameplay and consequential choices because developers are realizing that we just love having our decisions matter. Tanine Allison, who I mentioned before, wrote a stellar article in defense of Until Dawn's often criticized limited gameplay. She brilliantly pointed out that the lack of control we have over the game is what makes it work as a game. When our agency is taken from us, stripped down to split-second decisions and terrifying don't-move sequences that I almost never pass. Like seriously, I just have an aneurysm every time. I have no idea what's wrong with me. It enhances the entire experience. What, so you think you're in for a safe and cozy adventure where every time you balls it up, you get a game over screen and a lovely pat on the back?
Oh, no.
There's a common misconception about the way story and gameplay function in games. If you haven't come across this idea before, it's regarded as the great ludology versus narratology debate. Now, I won't go into too much detail when it comes to this debate because trust me, it's a doozy. But the general crux of it is in looking at two opposing frameworks in the context of studying video games: ludology and narratology, and the general belief that they inherently clash. This perceived conflict stems from the basic attitude that ludology, when looked at solely through the function of gameplay, is inherently non-linear, while narratives, by their very design, must be linear. We see this tension represented through games in a lot of ways, when chase sequences are jarringly interrupted by cutscenes, or even in moments of ludonarrative dissonance. You know, when Nathan Drake seems to appreciate the value of life 1 minute, but then literally the very next has you mowing down tidal waves of goons because gameplay. Honestly, the debate between story and gameplay is worthy of its own video, but I'll wrap it up for now by saying that interactive movies could very well be the key to demonstrating how narratology and ludology can actually work together to create a memorable playing experience, through their dedication to branching narratives while simultaneously maintaining clear-cut rules of gameplay. These games create a beautiful harmony between the two seemingly opposed concepts. In doing this, who knows? Perhaps they could provide a new framework of interactivity that is truly, authentically dependent on us. So with all this in mind, is the term interactive movie really what we should be applying to games like these? Yeah, no, it's really not. Please don't use it, please. In fact, I'm going to admit something that I've been hanging on to this entire video. I hate the term interactive movie. Oh, that feels good to get off my chest. But I think the biggest thing I hate about the label of the interactive movie is that the phrase itself is an oxymoron. It literally conflicts with itself. You cannot have a movie that is interactive because by nature, a movie is inherently viewed. So by its very definition, the entire phrase just doesn't make sense. Anyway, I feel like I've really ranted that. I really had to expel that energy. Just I'm gonna be straight with you, calling these games interactive movies this entire video has been a very painful ordeal. The reason being that it's hard to address the games that have changed my life as not games. The interactive movie label, while used harmlessly, carries harmful connotations. Not only does it undervalue the very essence of what makes these titles so emotionally effective, but it kinda accuses anyone who sits down to experience them as not being a real player at all. Why do we persist in this idea that games with heavy narratives aren't truly games, when narratives are the very thing that make games stand out from novels and films in the first place? Stories not only underpin many of the most iconic and beloved games of all time, but for some, myself included, they're the reason we pick up the controller in the first place. So whether you think they're pompous, janky cringe fests for elitist noobs, the greatest technical marvel that ever blessed this earth, or a bit of both, I implore you to reconsider your judgment around the interactive movie. After all, it's not just in the stories video games tell, but in how they're told that truly matters. Thanks again for watching. If you made it this far, just know that I really appreciate the time you take to watch my content, and I hope, as always, that you took something valuable away from it. This topic is very specific, but I think it's also because it's highly personal to me. I'm not gonna lie that Detroit Become Human and Heavy Rain are among my favorite games of all time, purely because I'm the sort of player that really loves stories and the sort of narratives that games can portray. And I feel like the whole idea of calling them interactive movies really undervalues the very thing that makes their story so impactful. But anyway, enough from me. I hope you enjoyed, and if so and you'd like to see more stuff like this, please like and subscribe because it means so much to know that my content is enjoyed and appreciated. And now that you've done that, if you don't mind, I'm gonna go replay Until Dawn and see exactly what happens when you kill all the characters immediately. So I'll see you next time.